So I think because it's still kind of the beginning of the year, I would like to talk about a very important Buddhist teachings from the Buddha, particularly important, I think, in the modern era, and maybe you'll understand as we go along. And in order to introduce this, I want to start with an analogy, and that is, if you want to go backpacking, go hiking in the mountains for a long time, maybe with a group of people, and and you end up with a sharp pebble in your shoe, and you're trying to hike this long distance, and it begins rubbing into your soles of your feet, and maybe even cutting into it or blistering it, and if you're still planning to go for a long time, if you don't take the pebble out, that would be considered not very skillful for a skilled hiker. You're going to injure yourself, you're going to slow yourself down, you're going to make it more difficult to walk. And so a skillful person would take it out. So it's unskillful. If you're going with it's also can be harmful. You'll be hurt by it over time. If you're going with a group of people and you're going into maybe risky long distance backpacking hiking, if you might put the whole group in risk if you end up being injured unnecessarily like that. And so maybe there's a trip leader, and the trip leader says, you got to take this pebble out because it's okay for you to have a big gapping sore there, but it's not really safe for the rest of us to have to take care of you or slow down because of you, and you really have to stop. Take it out. Or it might be that because it's so much risk involved for other people, your behavior keeping that pebble in there, that the others might blame you. This is blameworthy. You're putting us at risk. This is not good. So there are these 4 criteria that might go into deciding to take the pebble out. It's not skillful to keep it in there if you want to do this long hike. It's going to hurt you. It's going to harm you. It's the trip leader who knows a lot about hiking and the consequence of these things doesn't approve of it. And the rest of the people feel it's blameworthy. To blame you for kind of not being on the trip in a way that's supportive and helpful and safe for everyone else. Now, it's possible that you are hiking with that pebble, and it is maybe very difficult and dangerous terrain you're hiking with, and lots of thorny bushes you have to go through, and big rocks and sharp rocks that you have to step around and all that. And it's so difficult and so challenging, just the environment to walk in, and the places where you get most hurt are around you, not in your foot, that you might not notice the pebble there. But once you clear all the dangers and there's no more external threats to you as you walk, then at that point what gets highlighted is what's left, or where the challenges are, which is that pebble rubbing against your foot. And so you might take it out. Lately I've been learning a lot about people who are called through hikers, people who will hike long distances, like from 6 months will hike from the Mexican border to Canadian border. And to be able to do that in 6 months, which is quite a trek, they have to travel very lightly. And so every ounce is measured, every half ounce is measured, to try to get the weight down, because because of the long distance, things that normally would not be a challenge for people become a challenge and become significant. And it might be that even the seam of your sock, that maybe, hiking for 2 days with that sock, no problem at all. You never think of an issue. But having the sock and, hiking for weeks and weeks with the socks in that seam, it might ever so subtly be rubbing and irritating eventually. And so something which is not considered to be unskillful in ordinary life Now, in this environment, in this through hiking, is considered unskillful, can cause harm, and maybe in the right circumstances, the trip leader might censor it, say you got to get different socks or do something. And maybe if you're putting this team at risk, maybe it's blameworthy, something like that. So these 4 criteria, it changes, where you are, what's skillful, what's not skillful, what's blameworthy, what's not blameworthy, what causes harm, depending on the circumstance and what we notice. So this is in the background of this teaching I'm going to give you for the Buddha, this criteria, this way of analyzing. And it's a way of analyzing our situation that partly depends on experience, what we're experiencing, what we're paying attention, for us learning to be skillful. The other criteria is a little bit more tricky for a lot of people, I think, in the modern world. The idea that what is censored by other people, what other people don't approve of, wait a minute, I don't know if I want to listen to other people. I should decide for myself. And also this word blameworthy. That's also, that's now we're getting into value judgments. I don't want to be around people who blame me. That's not wise or good. So we get into a little more tricky territory for people, these last 2 criteria. But, in plenty of situations in life, we might go to an expert, someone who really knows, and say, what do you think of this? I'm thinking of body surfing. I'm thinking of taking it up, and I've heard there's really good body surfing. And you could go to some surfer who knows the coast. He said, I'm thinking of, trying out to learn how to body surf at Maverick. Maverick is one of the most difficult places to surf in all of California when the waves are big, dangerous, and rocks and all kinds of things. And so luckily you ask the expert, and they say, you should probably not start there. And Capitola might be a good place to start. And so, there are times when we ask people for advice like that, someone who knows. So this is all kind of in the background of this teaching. So this is a very famous teaching called the Kalama Sutta, the discourse to the Kalamas, the people in northern India that the Buddha visited. And he visited their village or their town. And they came to him, a group of the people in town came to him and said, we get a lot of spiritual teachers coming through. And there's a lot of wide range of teachings they give. And we're perplexed by all these things that they're teaching. We don't know, who should we believe? The question more specifically is, so we are perplexed and in doubt. Which of these teachers speak the truth and which speak falsehoods? So that's reasonable. So here we are in this, we're in probably one of the most, our times is probably one of the most religiously diverse times in human history. With the amount of different religious teachings, spiritual teachings we have contact with so easily on the web. Just go down the street and there's another place of worship, and there's so many books and so much stuff that's there. And so some people could easily be perplexed. And what do we do with all this? And how do I find my way through it? And even just within Buddhism, there's such a wide range of different teachings. And some people come innocently to Buddhism and think, well, Buddhism is just good. And so they have this very positive orientation to Buddhism, just a good thing, not realizing that there is a wide range of Buddhist teachings. And if you start learning some of the range of Buddhist teachings, some people at minimum would go something like, really? What? Because some of it is the range, that exists would, from one range to the other range with the view, so that's strange over there. So people get perplexed. So the question of what is true, what can we believe in as true and what's false, seems like a reasonable question. How do you find your way? So that's what the Buddha was asked. And what's interesting is he does not answer the question. He kind of reorients it. He answers basically a different question. He answered it in terms of the way he thinks and the way he looks at the world. And generally, the idea of what spiritual teaching, what doctrines are true and false, was not a topic he was particularly interested in getting into. And he certainly was not interested in debating it. And he was not, and he was very explicit. He was not interested in any of his followers and himself asserting that my doctrine is true and yours is false. Mine is better. And even the idea that my teaching is ultimate, I have the ultimate truth or the ultimate teaching, I really have what it is. I said this also was something he discouraged his followers to do. So it's kind of a little bit of a drag if you go to a party and you say, well, what do you believe? Well, I believe something, but I don't really believe what I believe is ultimate. I don't really believe it's the truth, and better than your truth or something. And well, so maybe that's nice. So anyway, so he doesn't answer whether it's true or false. He replies in a different way. First, he appreciates and says, yes, makes sense that you're perplexed and that you have doubt hearing all these different teachings. And what he does is he gives them, first he gives them advice and tells them the criteria for deciding what is true or false, deciding this, what criteria not to use. And then he tells them criteria to use. But is it really criteria of deciding what's true and false? Not really. It's just the criteria that the Buddha thinks is useful for a good life. And but the first criteria of what not to rely on is what many people, religious people, rely on for what they think is the truth. And this is, I know now this is the truth, and they hang on to it. So in some ways, one of the reasons why this is a popular teaching among some people in the modern world is that there's a lot of tentativeness or reluctance to rely on religious doctrine as being the truth. There's so much harm that's caused in the world sometimes on doctrine, so much debate, so much strife. When I have the truth, and you don't have the truth, or something. And so, but amazingly, what I'm about to read to you pulls the rug from underneath the effort to, or the tendency to take these sources as being where we get our truth from. So it is a little bit, I don't know if it's unkind for the Buddha to do this, but it's certainly very challenging for some people when they're rooted in these sources of authority. So this is what the Buddha says. It is fitting for you to be perplexed, fitting for you to be in doubt. Doubt has arisen in you about perplexing matters. So, do not go by oral tradition. Do not rely on oral tradition. Well, there weren't any books back then. So all the texts, so-called texts, that were preserved by people's memories and recited were by oral tradition. People had memorized it and spoke it. You didn't go to the library to learn about the teachings. You went to someone who had memorized the texts and the teachings. So do not go by the oral tradition, by the lineage of teaching, by hearsay, by a collection of scriptures, like this book I'm reading for, by logical reasoning, by inferential reasoning, by reason cognition, by the acceptance of a view after thinking about it, and by the seeming competence of the speaker, or because you think that person is our teacher. So don't go by oral tradition, just because it's spoken by the tradition that you're in. This is the teachings of your tradition. Don't go by the teaching lineage, just because it's Buddhism, and Buddhism's been around for a long time, and certainly Gil has a lineage of teachers behind him, and therefore that lineage must, is there, and so that must be, Gil's in the know. And don't go by hearsay. Just because you hear it doesn't mean that it's true. And then by collection of scriptures, just because it's in a book, even a Buddhist book, I spend a lot of time reading these kinds of books, but to take that, just because it's in the book, it's true, you can rely on, the Buddha says, be careful, don't do that. And then all kinds of different ways in which we can use our mind to reason and think about it, to reason it out, logically, and it's, some people find it like they want to rely on their reason, their capacity for careful thinking and analysis, and that's what they can really rely on. And the Buddha suggests that that's not really where what you should rely on if you're interested in spiritual teaching. And so then the Buddha says, well, this is what you can rely on. But when you know for yourselves, so that's the opening phrase. Unfortunately, some people in the modern world who really love this sutta will stop there. And they'll interpret this to mean, you should really only go by what you know for yourself. But if that's so easy to be done naively, it's some kind of intuition, or maybe our reasoning, or our preferences, and also our ability to know for ourselves sometimes is a little bit suspect because we interpret things a lot. And it's hard to see when we interpret versus when we're really seeing something directly. And so this idea of it's possible to naively think you're relying on yourself when it's not a reliable source of information or understanding in this regard. But you have to read the rest of it. So the Buddha says, when you know for yourselves that these things are unskillful, these things are blameworthy, these things are censored by the wise, and these things, if accepted and undertaking, lead to harm and suffering, then you should abandon them. So here are the four criteria I was describing earlier. So rather than answering what is true and false, he says he's interested in what you should abandon. And later we'll see in the text, in what you should do. So the Buddha is much more interested in behavior than he is in belief. He's interested in what we pick up, what we get involved in, what we get, and what we leave alone, don't get involved in. So here he is saying that if anything you do fits into these four criteria, that then you should stop doing it. So if it's unskillful, if it causes harm and suffering, that's relatively easy for many of us to believe and to understand. It's like having the pebble in your shoe or something. And what happens with meditation, it's a little bit like, I don't know if it's a little bit like, but if you maybe as a stretch of analogy, it's like the thru hikers. That as we meditate or develop a deeper and deeper meditation, deeper calm, more settled, more aligned, less agitated, that we become increasingly sensitive to what the pebbles are in our minds and hearts. Pebbles that we didn't even know we have because we're so busy fending off the dangers and the challenges of daily life. We're agitated, we're concerned, we're caught up in things that we don't even notice that the small resentment that we are constantly carrying in the background is even there, let alone that it's a problem. Because we're so busy, concerned with much more important things, supposedly, at least from our mind's point of view. But as we meditate and get quieter, at some point that resentment that's maybe small in the background is what's left, stands out. So, now I understand. This is not a skillful thing to continue this resentment. It causes harm and suffering for me to have it. And so maybe I'll let it go. And if you do a little bit of reflection, you realize, it's always been harmful for me and unskillful to have it there. I just was so agitated or so preoccupied with other things, I never noticed that it was there. I didn't notice the impact it had. But now that I'm so settled in meditation, I see the impact. So as people develop their meditation more and more, there's more that happens than just we become calm and peaceful, which does for some people. But actually a very important part of this meditation practice is that we start having insight or understanding into what is skillful and what is harmful. What is unskillful, what is harmful, what is skillful, and what is beneficial. And our ability to discern that becomes more subtle or more refined as we become less agitated, as we learn to settle away or let go of the coarser or the surface kind of ways in which we're living in unskillful ways, and so we get more and more subtle. And so they say that people who are really well developed in practice, what's the expression? It's the expression in Christianity of, like, for a saint, it's like having sand in your eye or something. Like the slightest little fault, slightest little way we're off, looms really big, is really sensitive to it. And people don't want to do anything. They don't want to say anything that's a little bit off. They don't want to do anything at off. They don't want to let their mind go in any kind of way that's a little bit off, because we're so sensitive to how it's unskillful and how it's harmful. So it's a little bit bad news to meditate. In the sense that we start seeing these tendencies, what we're doing inside in our mind. But hopefully there's enough calm, joy, wisdom, compassion, and understanding about the value of this, that we do it willingly and happily. Oh, this is good to see how this works. I see now what I'm doing. And now I can do something about it, that I see it. I can take the pebble out. The other two criteria, that it's censored by the wise, that I think some people have been a little bit more tentative about that idea. But, you can go, imagine that you go to the wisest person you ever know in your life, maybe someone who's been, supported you, helped you in your life, or you had some contact with. And then you think of the thing you do in your life that you're least proud that you do. Maybe it's, I don't know what that would be. But maybe you do creative things about how you pick your nose and where you put that stuff. When no one's looking. And you walk up to this really wise person that you know and respect a lot, and how they view you. Just say, "Oh, by the way, I need to tell you something." and it just doesn't feel good, right? Like, well, I guess not. And so to consider some of the people who you most respect and are most wise, what they would feel kind of like, "Oh, really? You do that?" Or, "I don't think you should do that." Now, in terms of Buddhist practice, a wise person is someone like who has, gone backpacking so much, they know all the skills that are needed for these through hikes, and they're ready to teach you and show you and say, "This is what you need to do. You're carrying too much weight." And so it's someone who knows the terrain of the practice, the path. And so a wise person can say, "That's not helpful." They censor it. And the advantage of that, there's a number of advantages of having a reference point like that. One is you don't have to learn everything for yourself, which can take a long time. You can get a little bit faster if you get some advice around some areas. And also it's a nice check and balance against the ways in which we can fool ourselves. Because we can believe we're doing what's right, but someone who's wise can explain to you, actually it doesn't work that way. It works differently. And of course, the person who's wise can make a mistake as well, so we have to be careful not to just be completely blind about accepting what other people say. But if we completely rule them out, then I think we're shortchanging ourselves as well. And then more difficult is the idea of blameworthy. Decide is it blameworthy. But I think that my impression is that there are certain forms of behavior that are so deeply almost instinctual, the movement in human beings to feel like, this doesn't feel good, so blameworthy. Or there are certain forms of harm that's caused that you don't want to do that. That's blameworthy, especially if you're causing harm to other people. So is it appropriate to blame someone or criticize someone who's harming other people? Or are we supposed to just kind of, look the other way and not do it? When is it skillful and beneficial to be involved in the kind of evaluation that involves some kind of criticism of other people or criticism of oneself, to blameworthy? I don't have a good answer for that, but I think it's certainly an interesting one to think about, given that the Buddha offers this as one of the 4 criteria to evaluate. So to repeat myself, he's not saying what is true and false. He's pointing to criteria so you can know what you can do. So doing more than believing. And so what you can do is to let go of things which are harmful and then pick up things which are beneficial. And then the Buddha gives a particular example of what he means. And what he does is kind of in a Socratic way, in the sense that he asks the Kalamas questions. And then so he asks, what do you think? When greed arises in a person, is that for the person's welfare or for the person's harm? So that's an interesting question. So maybe there might be some rare occasion when some of you maybe are greedy. And if you really take time to feel what that greed is like, especially if it's strong, is it harmful? Is it harmful for you? Is it harmful for others? And I think that sometimes people will see that it's harmful in and of itself. That greed itself is a contracted state, painful state to have. And then the regular pursuit of greed, on and on, is so detrimental for some people that it ruins their lives. So it can be harmful. And I think from the Buddhist analysis, or this, if you're a through hiker and you really want to get into the subtlety of how the mind works, then greed is a harmful state for yourself. So the Kalamas say yes, greed is harmful. Then the Buddha goes on, for a greedy person, someone who's overcome with greed, so this is like the extreme version of greed, with mind obsessed by greed, destroys life, kills, takes what is not given, transgresses with another's spouse, partner, and speaks falsehood, and encourage others to do likewise. So then he says, will that lead to that person's harm and suffering for a long time? And so the Kalamas, they say yes. Then he does the same thing for hatred and for delusion. So he's giving kind of an extreme version or consequence of acting on these forces as a way of kind of showing them how to do this analysis that he just talked about. And then he does the same for non-greed, non-hate, and non-delusion. And here he says if there's non-hate, which non-greed, which the word non, the prefix non in Pali implies the positive presence of positive opposite. So the opposite of greed might be generosity. Opposite of hate is love, compassion. The opposite of delusion is wisdom. So if there are these non-greed, non-hatred, and non-delusion, is that for a person's, he says, is that for a person's welfare or a person's harm? And they say for the person's welfare. And a person without greed and without hatred, without delusion, does not destroy life, does not take what's given, does not transgress with another's partner, or speak falsehoods. It does not encourage others to do that, as well. Will that lead to that person's welfare and happiness for a long time? And they say yes. He said in that case, and then he goes on, what do you think? Are these things skillful or unskillful? And they say they're skillful, these non-hate, non-greed, non-delusion. Are they censored or praised by the wise? And they say, oh, they're praised by the wise. Are they blameworthy or blameless? They're blameless. And then, when accepted and undertaken, do these things lead to welfare and happiness? And they say, yes. And so the Buddha says, then you should undertake those things. You should pick them up and be involved in the things that lead to your long-term welfare and happiness and are skillful, not blameworthy, and not censored by the wise, but are praised by the wise. So here's 4 pieces of criteria. So one of the interesting, I think very significant things about this is that it offers us some way to evaluate our behavior, our speech, what we're saying, and even what goes on in our minds that is very different than taking something on faith, using our reasoning, just rationally deciding what's right, or going with our preferences or intuitions, or just going along with our desires. It doesn't require a book. It doesn't require, studying these big books of Buddhism to find out, what should I be doing? It's criteria that we can use for ourselves. But it's not just do it because you know it for yourself, just like some naive way. It's using particular criteria that lead to the very thing that the criteria are concerned with. It leads to welfare and benefit, welfare and well-being and happiness. So to start looking at things and saying, is this really good? Is this skillful? Is this useful? And it's noteworthy to me that when he went through this exercise with the Kalamas, the first time on greed, hate, and delusion, he only used the 2 of the criteria, skillful and harmful, or unskillful and harmful. And this thing of blameworthy and censorably wise, he waited till later to bring that in. And maybe it's just as delicate back in the ancient world to use those blameworthy and censored by the wise criteria as it is for us here to use it. But they have their role as well. And so how can we wisely take into account what are considered blameworthy by other people? How can we wisely take into account what the wise people might censor, the people we respect and care a lot for in our life? Interesting that this discourse doesn't end with this teaching. The discourse then goes on, and the Buddha says that someone who has let go of greed, hate, and delusion, if that person then starts dwelling, living, abiding in loving kindness, there are 4 benefits. It's almost like the Buddha expects that if you've let go of greed, hate, and delusion, and if you start living skillfully and for welfare, that gives rise to a sense of goodwill. I think that's kind of remarkable. And that is something the Buddha really finds very helpful and valuable. That's skillful, to have goodwill. That leads to long-term benefit and well-being. That's praised by the wise, and that is blameless, to have goodwill for people and other people. And then he ends the discourse with, say, if you cultivate or have this goodwill, then there are 1 of 4 possible reassurances that you can have. It's kind of like saying, you should do this, and here are I can reassure you, this is what's going to happen to you. This is what's beneficial. The word for reassurance literally means breathe easily. So if you want to breathe easily in your life as you go through life, then do this goodwill thing. Let go of greed, let go of hatred, let go of delusion. Cultivate goodwill, and it'll help you breathe easily, or you'll have reassurance. And so it's kind of interesting. He says, so there are 4 reassurances. If there is rebirth, you'll get reborn well if you cultivate a lot of goodwill. So that's nice. If. The second assurance is that if there is no rebirth, then in this very life, you'll maintain yourself happy without any hostility or ill will. So, either way, you win, you win, right? And then he goes on and says, a third reassurance is, suppose evil comes to one who does evil. Then when I have no evil intentions towards anyone, how can suffering afflict me, since I do no evil deed? So if you've let go of greed, hate, and delusion, that would be the source for doing bad things, then the karmic repercussions from doing evil or bad things will not come back and bite you. So that's a reassurance. Oh, so at least that kind of causality I'm free of. And it's supposed, it's if. And remember, he's talking to the kalamas who are perplexed by what teachers say. So the Buddha is not coming and saying, this is how it is. He's saying, well, if. He's going to leave them with something positive to do, not just criteria, goodwill. And this is a good thing to do. If you believe in rebirth, it's a good thing. If you don't believe in rebirth, it's a good thing. If you believe in karma, it's a good thing to have goodwill. You won't cause evil. That's going to come back and bite you. And then the fourth one is, suppose evil does not come from one who does evil. So in case you don't believe in karma, then right here and now, one sees oneself purified of greed, hate, and delusion, which is pretty good. So, if you're perplexed by all the teachings that you hear, even hear from me, then you might want to consider what it's like to start being sensitive to what goes on, even in deep meditation, to what is skillful, what is helpful, what's onward leading to greater happiness and well-being, and what is not. Some people might only in deep meditation will realize that the momentum of resentment they're carrying with them is not a good thing. It's not a healthy thing. And so they start beginning to let go of it. And so to start using these criteria very gently, not in a big, complicated way to be busy in the mind, but it's more of a deeper and deeper sensitivity that comes. The sensitivity the deepest sensitivity comes when the mind is quietest and clear. And it's almost as if it's a natural thing for some point for the mind to orient itself to take away the pebble that's digging into the soles of the feet. It's almost like a natural thing to want to take your hand off the hot stove. It's almost a natural thing when the mind is quiet enough to sense and feel what's unhealthy, unskillful, harm-producing, what goes on inside. And to let it go, or try to let it go, or to start having a wise relationship to it and not let it drive you and control you. And if you need something additional to do besides evaluating your experience this way, then cultivating goodwill will help you breathe easily. And if you believe in rebirth, it's really good. If you don't believe in rebirth, it's really good. If you believe in karma, it's good. And if you don't believe in karma, it's still good. So you can't go wrong. So we have a couple of minutes. Any questions or comments about this? If we have is there a mic over here?
So the Kalamas were perplexed by the number of teachings, so they asked Buddha this question. There's a similar sutta where Mahaprajapati Gautami, the Buddha's stepmother, she is perplexed by a lot of teachings within the Buddha's community. There is Sariputra who's teaching this, there is Mahamoggallana who's teaching that, and then there's Ananda who's a favorite among women, teaching something totally different. So Mahaprajapati Gautami asks the Buddha, how do I know which is the right teaching? And the Buddha succinctly gives 9 points. And that seems very direct, whereas the Kalama Sutta, it's kind of a little peripheral. So why is the Kalama? It seems to not be very direct. So it's little. It seems to skirt the issue, but the Kalama Sutta seems to be quoted more than the other one that Mahaprajapati Gautami asks the Buddha about. Do you know why? Because the 9 succinct points that it tells about the teaching should lighten the load on one's mind. It should be conducive to concentration and things like this. Those seem much more simple.
Looking for it here. So, can I turn this off? So, the difference, I think, that is significant here is that Mahaprajapati was a disciple of the Buddha. So she was already she was already convinced and dedicated to the path that he was teaching, and she wanted to be taught, how do you do this path that you're teaching? The Kalamas were not disciples of the Buddha. They were just people who were perplexed and trying to find their way, and the Buddha didn't come and try to convert them to his teaching. And he was very, very respectful for them in a certain way, where he wasn't kind of trying to say, well, I have the best teaching, listen to me. He was offering them pragmatic criteria that allowed them to find their own way through all these different teachings that come. And if they came to him and said, we like your teachings, and we want to get enlightened, what can we do? Then he might have given them Mahaprajapati teaching. And there were things like, they're wonderful. It's paired. He said, don't do contentment. Yeah, I was looking for it now. Anyway, so that's. So what's interesting about his teaching to the Mahaprajapati, what she asks is kind of in a nutshell, what is your teaching? And he does not offer doctrine to her, dogma or doctrine, or he doesn't offer the truth in a sense. He offers, I think it's 8 actually, 8 mental states to cultivate. And that's kind of interesting. Not a belief, but again, it's not. The focus in Buddhism is not so much on belief as it is on what we do and what we cultivate. And so then, rather than having to believe or not believe that contentment is a good idea, this is the truth. Contentment is the way, is the truth. You can, that you become the person who can experiment with contentment, find how it's useful, try to develop it, and you're not at the risk of having to, commit yourself to some doctrine that you don't quite believe in. Just, you're encouraged to be content. So if you think it can be short, my answer can be short. You're welcome to ask. If there's maybe, there, right behind you is the mic, to your right.
Yeah, it might not be short, but you can just point me in the right direction. What would the Buddhist answer be? So let's say the little pebbles have gotten into your foot and you get to the point of subtlety where you have the X-ray mind and you see those. So you see the resentments in your life. What is the Buddhist answer for how to actually let those go? And then maybe just like where to look for the answer, because that might be a long answer.
I think that the practices that he teaches are directly related to doing that work. Because sometimes it's very difficult. You can't just let go of it like that. And so, for example, the 4 foundations of mindfulness, the practice of mindfulness in all its domains, so that when one would develop a heightened sensitivity to one's body, heightened sensitivity to the feeling tones, to the states of mind that we're involved in, and to how the mind operates. And this heightened sensitivity to all these different, the inner ecology of what's happening will do a number of things. One is it starts to calm us down so that we can see more clearly the resentment. And as the mind becomes calmer, it becomes more workable or more fluid, so a mind that's frozen or tight or contracted, it's hard to let go. But as the mind relaxes, then there's my resentment. And it becomes easy to let go because the mind becomes more flexible or wieldy in a certain way. And also the other thing it does is we begin seeing much more clearly the different component elements of resentment. It's not just a single solitary thing. It's made up of many different pieces that contribute together to make up this thing. And so the four foundations of mindfulness kind of teachings begin showing us what the different elements are and how we participate in it and where the attachment actually is, where the holding actually is, so that something can happen.
Thank you.